to Chase Berry for three. Rebound by Peyton Crispin. He's going to put it back. They got it! The Lakers hit a three.
Welcome back again. Music Park, home of your SWOCC Lakers.
Can't get the shot to go, and the Lakers win the ball game. Go! Lakers win! Lakers win in overtime. 108-106.
Do you like to work with metal, fire, electricity? Would you like to make money doing it? At Southwestern, we can help make your dream a reality. With our degree and certificate programs in welding, you'll be prepared for a career in the welding and fabrication industry in as little as a year. Check out our website and let Southwestern spark your career in welding today.
Southwestern Oregon Community College gave me the opportunity for a new career doing something I love. I'm Amber Yardley, and 3 years ago, I knew I needed to make a career change for myself and my family. With the support of staff, my academic advisor, and the instructors at SWOCC, I now have a dream job and the confidence to continue my education. Contact Southwestern Oregon Community College and start the journey to your new career today.
This is Southwestern's Dental Assisting Program. In just one short year, you could be a dental assistant. Sign up now for your one-year dental assisting certification.
Congratulations, you just got accepted into college. Now, how do you pay for it? Fortunately, there are several options out there to consider. Follow this simple step-by-step guide as you figure out how to pay for college. Step 1. Fill out your FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, FAFSA. Your FAFSA will determine if you qualify for financial aid, including grants, some scholarships, work study, and federal student loans. The good news is, most people qualify for some financial aid, which is why this is the most important step in figuring out how to pay for college. Step 2. Figure out how much you may need to borrow by weighing your college costs versus your contributions, including any grants or scholarships. Some easy arithmetic will make your math teachers proud. Let's say you're...
She would prefer not to take 20 pounds of paper back with her. So if you're interested or know anybody, go for that. There might still be some iris station monitors. It's got the cute little QR code on the back. You can pop that. The remaining talks in the series available for your refrigerator. If you want to be a minion, mini posters and big posters. Please feel free to take them and take them any place that posts posters. Thank you, my band and minions. So one of the things I noticed is that Iris SSA has been doing their Distinguished Lecture Series for about 15 years. I've been doing the Cascadia Anniversary talk for about the same time. This is the 15th one. And this is, of all of the people that I host, I think one of the more important talks to consider, because the reason I started doing this back in the day was to try and use it as a specific indicator of something that we all need to be aware of. And so it was just a nice thing. It was also a nice thing because it's actually 2 anniversaries, because it's always my parents' anniversary on January 26th too. And so they continually think that you all come out to appreciate them for having me so that I can present the anniversary talk. Hey. Thank you. There will be an extra piece of coal in my Christmas stocking next year. So this is important because, one, Cascadia is in our backyard. And so that preparedness piece, hopefully, if nothing else, when you go home this weekend, you find a small something to add to a kit or start a kit that will help you be prepared for the next great disaster. And it doesn't even have to be Cascadia. It can just be a winter storm that comes through. And I think that's the key to preparedness. I will be brief with the remaining moments, because one of the things that I've noticed over the 24 years that we've lived on the South Coast is that when I first arrived, very few people knew that great earthquakes of magnitude 9 and higher could happen in our neighborhood. And I think, how many of you know that that's the case? And I know this is kind of like preaching to the choir. How many of you are like, wait, big earthquakes here? Yeah, sorry. But one of the things about that is I think we have transitioned. How many of you have a to-go bag in your vehicle right now? Okay, that's not too bad. How many of you have some supplies at home? Awesome. How many of you have enough supplies at home to last 2 weeks? Fantastic. Well, yeah, I'm working on it. I think I'm almost there. So practice what I preach, not necessarily what I do. But that's the key. And so I think that while this is kind of a targeted audience, if you kind of bring that to your neighbors and think about it. And again, every time there's a decent-sized earthquake, add something to your supplies. Every time you come to a geology talk, add something to your supplies. I think that's the key, is just getting started. So it's my pleasure this evening to introduce to you Dr. Sarah Minson. And she did a short talk to mostly middle schoolers today, but some college students as well, and has an interesting pathway, I think, to her STEM career. Started as a homeschool student, transitioned to community college, went to an institution that some of you might be familiar with, Berkeley, then went on to California Institute of Technology for graduate work, and also was a Mendenhall postdoc. She's currently with the US GS, and I'm very pleased to introduce to you this evening Dr. Sarah Minson.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I am going to give a talk, and if at any point I don't make any sense, feel free to yell at me or throw tomatoes or whatever works for you. So these are there are two anniversaries coming up. Well, 3 when you count Ron's parents, but there are 2 earthquake anniversaries. One, as Ron was saying, on the 26th is the anniversary of the magnitude 9 Cascadia earthquake from January 26, 1700 at 9 p.m. And you can see what's left of it when you look out on the coast and you see these drowned forests of trees that are out in the ocean but dead. And you might wonder, why are trees growing in the ocean where they die? Well, when they started, they weren't in the ocean. They were growing happily on the land until there was an earthquake that made the land level sink, and now you have some dead trees in the water to remind you that earthquakes happen. But the other anniversary that just came by was the 30th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake, which was also the anniversary of the first time that earthquake early warning was ever used in the United States. Not the first system worldwide. That honor probably goes to Japan. In the 1960s, they started an early warning system when they built their bullet train system. But in the US, the first occasion that earthquake early warning was ever used was after the Loma Prieta earthquake, where, as you might recall, the single largest loss of life was when the Cypress Freeway in Oakland collapsed. And in the days that followed, when there were aftershocks happening, but there also were workers climbing around on this damaged and fragile infrastructure, what they did was the USGS installed seismometers up in the Santa Cruz Mountains down on the peninsula, where the earthquake happened, and when they detected an aftershock, they would send a radio alert out to Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation, workers crawling around on the structure to tell them earthquake happening, and they successfully sent alerts for 12 magnitude 3.7 and larger earthquakes. So what is earthquake early warning? Well, the idea is pretty simple. An earthquake starts, you have seismometers near this place where the earthquake is beginning, and they detect that an earthquake is happening, and they send out an alert to some more distant populated system, and that alert gets sent out at the speed of light. But the most damaging motion is carried by something called the S wave, and the S wave travels at about 2 miles a second, and so the amount of warning time you get simply depends on how far away you are. There's some space that's too close to the earthquake to get a warning because the system is still detecting the earthquake and figuring out what's going on before it sends an alert, but then everybody gets an alert, and the amount of warning time you get simply depends on how far away you are and thus how long it takes the shaking to get to your location. So to look at this in sort of gory detail, let's look at a scenario where an earthquake starts in very far southern California and heads all the way up the San Andreas Fault to Los Angeles. So it starts. At first, right, we're figuring out what's happening. We haven't sent out the alert, so there's some area that doesn't get a warning. But then you send an alert to everyone, and so you get different amounts of warning time depending on how far away you are. It takes 25 seconds for the rupture to make it up to Palm Springs, so you get 25 seconds of warning in Palm Springs, 50 seconds of warning before shaking arrives in San Bernardino, and over a minute of warning before shaking arrives in Los Angeles. Similarly, if an earthquake like the size of the 1906 earthquake were to happen again, but conveniently start as far away from San Francisco as possible, you could get a full 90 seconds of warning before it got to San Francisco. Or if something like the 1700 earthquake happened again, but conveniently started as far away as possible in Northern California, it would take about 1.5 minutes to come up to us in Coos Bay, and a full 5 minutes before it reached Seattle. And you see this sort of information all the time. This is the handout that I got from the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning System that's being built for the West Coast of the United States. It's live in California and will be coming to Oregon and Washington probably this October. These are some pictures from media. The top is the New York Times, the bottom is the Washington Post. These are handouts from early warning systems around the world, from Japan and from China, describing how their early warning systems work. Journal articles, you will see this in this all the time throughout the scientific literature. This is how earthquake early warning works. This is how it gets explained. There's just one slight problem with this. None of this can possibly be true. Oops. So science is a process, right? The stuff that we learn tomorrow may be, different and amazing and completely different from what it is, but science is a living, breathing, and evolving thing, and there's always lots of work that still needs to be done. So tonight what I want to explain is, why doesn't earthquake early warning work this way, and how does it really work? And to understand that, the first thing you have to know is that it is a terrible name. I mean, the name is a complete misnomer. It is not earthquake early warning. You are not warning anyone for earthquakes. It doesn't even start until the earthquake has begun. What it is doing is warning you of impending shaking before that shaking arrives at your location. It's really shaking early warning. And that's a little bit tricky to get your head around, because an earthquake is simple. It's one thing to one people. It's an earthquake that happened in a particular location at a particular time with a particular magnitude. Loma Prieta happened October 17th, 1989 at 5:04 p.m., and it was a magnitude 6.9 earthquake. But shaking is different for different people. So this map down here is showing how strong shaking was in the Bay Area. And you can see that it was very strong in the mountains where the earthquake itself was. And unfortunately, there was an area of very strong shaking near Oakland, which is what led to the Cypress Freeway collapse. But shaking was very weak out here on the North Bay. So clearly, these people need to be warned, and these people need to be warned. But does this area need to be warned? Who do you warn? Well, I think that depends on who you are. So you can imagine that if, for example, you have a beloved family hand-me-down vase that you love and you don't want to break, then you care about even weak shaking that could knock that vase over. However, if you are running a train and your train only gets hurt if very, very, very strong shaking tries to derail it or breaks the tracks that it's running on, then you probably don't care about weak shaking that could knock over a vase. You only care about very strong shaking. On the other hand, if you're also a train and you stop the train in case there's shaking and turns out not to be any shaking, what have you lost? You just start the train again. Similarly, if you get warned that there may be shaking that might knock over your vase and you grab it and there isn't very strong shaking, well, what have you lost? You've just grabbed your vase unnecessarily. There's no downside, really, but that may not be true for everyone. You can imagine other users who really can't tolerate false alarms, right? If you're talking about an emergency shutdown of a nuclear power plant, which is called a SCRAM, or you're talking about cutting gas lines to a major metropolitan area, right? There are real consequences to if you make those decisions, and you can't make those decisions lightly, and a false alert could be very bad. And I want to stress that these are all fictional examples. I am not a train engineer. I do not run a nuclear power plant. This is just food for thought. These are not really how any of these things would behave. But again, some protective actions have serious consequences. This is something we are dealing with in Northern California, where recently the electric company PG&E has started doing what they call public safety power shutoffs, where they turn off the electricity if they think there's going to be a wildfire in order to prevent risk. But that has serious consequences when you turn off the power. UC Berkeley lost $500,000 in cancer research. Several deaths have been blamed on medical equipment failures when power went out. And the same goes for earthquake early warning. There are some actions that could potentially have serious consequences and cannot be taken lightly. So let's start with a complicated plot. So this plot is showing strength of shaking as a function of distance from the earthquake. In purple, the blue line is strength of shaking from a magnitude 4 earthquake all the way up to a magnitude 8 earthquake in yellow. And we're measuring strength of shaking in terms of acceleration in percent G, percent of the force of gravity. So 100% G is the force of gravity. It's the force that is currently pushing against you as you sit in your seat. And 50% G is half of that force, and 2% G is 2% of that force. And then these horizontal lines just represent 4 different levels of shaking, right? So you can imagine that 2% G, maybe that's the level where the lady with the vase gets worried that her vase may get knocked over and she wants to grab that. Whereas that's not going to do any damage to infrastructure. You don't even start to get minor damage, like cracking of chimneys, until you get up to around 20% G. So let's say that's the level that our fictional nuclear power plant cares about. So what I can do is I can simply flip these axes around and ask, if I'm a certain distance away from an earthquake, what is the smallest magnitude earthquake that's a threat to me? So the lady with the vase, if I'm 20 kilometers, which is about 12 miles from the earthquake, hey, I care about a magnitude 4 earthquake. That could potentially knock my vase over. But that's not strong enough to be any threat to my nuclear power plant. In fact, my fictional nuclear power plant's not going to care about anything smaller than about a magnitude 7.5 earthquake. So this is a 1993 earthquake that happened near Klamath Falls. And so the colored lines show shaking intensity on a map. And so you can imagine, hey, if you're in Klamath Falls, both the lady with the vase and the fictional nuclear power plant is definitely going to want to get warned, because that's strong shaking in Klamath Falls. But if you're over in Grants Pass or Medford, The shaking's not that strong. It may be strong enough that the lady with the vase wants warning, but the nuclear power plant isn't going to want to be warned for that earthquake. It's just not a threat at that distance and that magnitude. And all the way over here in Coos Bay, well, you probably wouldn't feel that earthquake at all, so probably nobody wants to be warned for that earthquake. So you don't care about all earthquakes. You just care about earthquakes that are close and or large enough to produce shaking. So for the Loma Prieta case, the people in the area blue, the vases probably want to be warned, but not the fictional nuclear power plant. But at that very same location in the 1906 earthquake, that produced strong enough shaking that both people would want to be warned. So the problem is, I can't make that decision. I can't say, in this case I warn just the vase lady, and in this case I warn both the vase and nuclear power plant, unless I know that this earthquake is as big as the 1906 earthquake and not as small as Loma Prieta. And the problem is that in order to know that, I need to actually see the earthquakes become that large in size. So what is earthquake magnitude? What is the magnitude of an earthquake? And the answer is, it's simply the actual, literal, physical size of an earthquake. The magnitude of an earthquake is simply calculated from the length of the fault that ruptured, the width of the fault that ruptured, and how far one side of the fault moved relative to the other. So Loma Prieta ruptured 25 miles of fault in the mountains on the San Francisco Peninsula, and there was about an average of 6 feet of slip along that rupture. So that was about 30 billion cubic feet of earthquake. Whereas the 1906 San Francisco earthquake ruptured 300 miles of San Andreas Fault with an average slip of 2 to 32 feet, so it's about 1 trillion cubic feet of earthquake. Now, we don't like to wander around and talk about how many billions or trillions of cubic feet of earthquake are, so we have a simple handy-dandy equation that we do to turn that into magnitude. And we say 30 billion cubic feet, that's magnitude 6.9. 1 trillion cubic feet, magnitude 7.9. But the problem is, all these earthquakes are running at about the same speed. And if I need to know that this is going to be the 1906 earthquake that's a threat to my nuclear power plant and not just Loma Prieta that was a threat to the vase, well, then I have to wait for it to run 25 miles to go up to be Loma Prieta, and then wait for it to run another 275 miles for it to go up all the way to be the size of the 1906 earthquake. And that takes a long time. Larger earthquakes take longer to happen because they have to run farther. So at the top, let's run side by side. At the top, the 1906 earthquake, and at the bottom, the 1989 earthquake. The red lines show the spatial extent of the earthquake. Here they go. And Loma Prieta is going to take, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds. It's pretty much ruptured the entire fault now, and it's done. I mean, now the shaking is traveling across the Bay Area, but that rupture, it's happened, it's done. Whereas San Andreas, a 1906 earthquake, it's still happening. It's still running to the north and the south. It's not going to be done until it runs all the way up to Cape Mendocino in the north and all the way south to San Juan Bautista. It's going to take minutes, and while we're waiting for that to happen, we are wasting valuable warning time. It's going to take so long to happen that I'm going to get bored and advance to the next slide. So here's the problem. Earthquakes are not psychic, and neither is earthquake early warning. And earthquakes don't know how large they are going to be in advance. A magnitude 8 earthquake is just a magnitude 5 earthquake that didn't stop and grew up to be a magnitude 6 earthquake that didn't stop. That grew up to be a magnitude 7 earthquake that didn't stop. That grew up to be, finally, a magnitude 8 earthquake. So again, if I'm standing 20 kilometers or 12 miles from my fault, right, and I'm the woman with the vase, I care about a magnitude 5 earthquake. That's a threat to me. And it only takes about a second for a magnitude 5 earthquake to happen and be like, oh yeah, that's a magnitude 5 earthquake. Send out the alerts, that's a magnitude 5 earthquake. But if I'm the fictional nuclear power plant that doesn't care about anything smaller than a magnitude 7.5, this was magnitude 5.1 La Habra from 2014. Well, let's look in comparison at the 2010 El Mayor Cucapa earthquake, a magnitude 7.2. Well, I have to wait a second for it to become a magnitude 5, another couple of seconds for it to go up to be a magnitude 6. It's a log scale. It's going to take 20-ish seconds to be a magnitude 7, even 7.5, that's going to be a lot longer. And while I'm waiting for this earthquake to grow up to be its full size, I am wasting valuable warning time as the shaking from this earthquake takes off and starts going to places. Yeah, it's still happening. You don't want to be in the swimming pool. Okay. So you don't get more warning time for bigger earthquakes. It just takes longer to see how big they are going to end up being, because earthquakes are not psychic, and neither is earthquake early warning. Now, I say some things like, we don't know how big the earthquake's going to be. The earthquake doesn't know how long it's going to be. And I do want to clarify one point. When I say I don't know something, or we don't know something, or we can't know something, it's not because I'm stupid, I don't think. And it's also not because earthquakes are magical. Like, we tend to romanticize it and think, oh, you know, it's the moon, or it's our dogs barking, or it's all those other things. But really, if you don't take anything else home, please take home that earthquakes are not magical ponies. They respond to very simple laws of physics. We completely understand the physics of earthquakes, really, right? You are building up stress in the earth. There is a point on the fault that is stressed enough that it finally slips. By slipping, it transfers stress to the places on the fault next to it, and if they are close enough to failure, they too move, and then they transfer stress to the points in the fault next to them, and if they're close enough to failure, they too move. I mean, it's really just like a set of dominoes falling. And if I could just look, I mean, we understand the physics of dominoes. If I could just look at the dominoes on the fault and see what they look like, I could totally tell you how far they're going to run. Are they just going to run a little way and be a baby earthquake? Or are they going to run a really long way and be a really big earthquake? But the problem is that, unlike dominoes, which are lying on the floor, I don't get to see what's on the fault. It's buried under miles and miles of rock. So it's like trying to tell you what this set of dominoes is going to do with the lights turned off and buried under miles and miles of rock. So how long does it take to get an alert out? Earthquake warning is not the same for everyone. It takes longer to issue an alert for stronger shaking, because you have to wait for more earthquake to happen to know that it's a big enough earthquake that it's going to produce stronger shaking. So at the bottom, what I've plotted is how much time it takes to say, this is a big enough earthquake that it's going to produce ground motion at different levels of ground motion. So if I'm the person with the vase and I care about 2% G shaking and I'm 20 kilometers or 12 miles from the fault, then it only takes a second to know this is a big enough earthquake that I care about. But if I'm the fictional nuclear power plant and I only care about 20% G or higher shaking, it's going to take more than 10 seconds to see that this earthquake is big enough that it's a threat to me, and that's going to eat a lot of warning time, because if it takes longer to issue an alert for shaking, but these dangerous S-rays are coming at me at 2 kilometers a second, I have to subtract how long it takes me to get an alert from when the shaking arrives at my location, and so the amount of warning time is shorter for stronger shaking because it takes longer to see that it's a bigger earthquake and that it's going to produce strong shaking, and it takes me longer to issue an alert. So, no, that's fine. So for the person with the vase, it only takes me a second to say, yes, you're going to feel shaking, and so I can still get her like 5 seconds of warning. But if I have to wait to see that this is going to be a magnitude 7.5 earthquake, it's too late. The shaking's already arrived at your location, and I can't give you any warning at all. And note that warning time is not increasing with distance. Being farther away doesn't necessarily give you more warning. It just means that you have to wait even longer to see it go up to be an even larger magnitude earthquake to see that it's going to produce strong shaking at a greater distance away from the fault. So let's do that example from Southern California again, right? So an earthquake starts very far south in Southern California. And at first, you're figuring out what's going on. You don't issue an alert. But then you know there's an earthquake. But then I don't think you issue an alert to everyone, because right at this moment, this is a teeny tiny earthquake in far Southern California. And the amount of shaking predicted almost everywhere is less than 1% G, less than 1% the force of gravity. So Palm Springs, it's predicted to have 2% G, so maybe you send an alert to the lady who was concerned about her vase, but you certainly don't send an alert to the nuclear power plant. And so as the rupture continues upward, it takes a long time to see that it's becoming a stronger earthquake. Even 50 seconds into the rupture, when there's already extremely strong shaking reaching San Bernardino, the predicted shaking in Los Angeles is still only 4% G. I don't know that you even alert Los Angeles now. And by the time the shaking gets to Los Angeles, the predicted shaking is still just 8% G, because it takes so long for earthquakes to happen. And we just don't know that it's a danger to Los Angeles until it gets to Los Angeles. So here is an example that may be closer to all of our hearts in this room. I made a little movie where we're going to do the big Cascadia earthquake, and it's going to be convenient. It's going to start as far away as possible, way in Southern California, and it's going to take a full 5 minutes to get to Seattle. And I'm going to plot the predicted shaking in Seattle, Portland, and Coos Bay, along with how long it would take until the shaking will arrive at that location. So it's going to take 94 seconds for the shaking to arrive in Coos Bay, but I don't think that means that you get 94 seconds of warning because, well, when the earthquake starts, the predicted shaking is nothing because it's a tiny earthquake in California. It's not going to do anything to Coos Bay. Well, as it starts getting closer to the border, you might go, oh, well, that could be a danger, the vases in Coos Bay. Let's warn some people with vases. But what if you're not the person with the vase? What if you care about very strong shaking or extreme shaking? Well, then you get much less warning time because you don't know that's going to happen until the earthquake actually gets close to you. And similarly in Seattle, even though this is a huge earthquake and has already spread damage through a large part of California and Oregon, the predicted shaking in Seattle is still just 4% G, and it will not be predicted to produce strong shaking in Seattle until it gets all the way up to Seattle. You simply don't get long warning times for large earthquakes because you can't predict that they're going to produce strong shaking until they already get close to you and become large enough magnitude that they can produce, that you would expect them to produce strong shaking. So you have a choice, right? I could have said right when that earthquake started, you know what, I want to be safe. Just in case, send me an alert, just in case that earthquake turns out to be the big one. Or I could say, no, wait, I'm a nuclear power plant. I can't afford false alarms. Don't send me an alert until you definitely know that this is going to produce strong shaking. But then you risk the alert possibly coming too late. And it's important to remember that if you take the first approach, if you take the better safe than sorry approach, give me a warning just in case, most of the alerts you receive will be false alarms because the vast majority of baby earthquakes do not grow up to be big magnitude earthquakes. The rule of thumb is that there's a factor of 10 difference in each magnitude earthquake. So for every one magnitude 8 earthquake, like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, there are 10 magnitude 7 earthquakes, like the Loma Prieta earthquake, 100 magnitude 6 earthquakes, like the 2014 earthquake in South Napa, 1,000 magnitude 5 earthquakes, like an earthquake from 2000 in Yountville that I looked up that's so small that I don't remember it, and then 10,000 magnitude 4s, 100,000 magnitude 3s, etc. So if you take the better safe than sorry approach, the vast majority of the time, the little baby earthquake you're seeing right now is not going to grow up to be a big earthquake. Okay, so let's do a confusing aside. A really confusing aside. I apologize. You probably do not want to see this. What is the best approach for early warning, right? Do you wait to make sure that the shaking is going to be strong, or do you take action when it's a little baby earthquake just on the real possibility that it might grow up to be a big earthquake? And it turns out that the answer is that the better safe than sorry strategy is the winning strategy. Okay. So let's do a fictional example. Let's look at our pretend train that I made up. Let's say if there's a damaging earthquake and the train derails, it costs $1 million in damage to the train and to the people on the train. If I have a false alarm, if I say, stop that train, and then it turns out nothing happens, everybody on that train is late for work and they lose $10,000 in productivity. Now let's say you have an early warning system and it catches a dangerous earthquake and successfully gets that train to slow before the shaking arrives at the location. You have prevented $1 million derailment. You still cost people $10,000 in productivity loss because they're still late for work, but there's a huge cost savings because you prevented $1 million derailment. So one way we can think about this is we can think about users in terms of the ratio of the cost of the damage they're trying to avert to the cost of taking action to avert that damage. So for a train, well, the damage they're trying to prevent is $1 million derailment, and the cost of stopping a train is $10,000 in lost productivity. That is a ratio of 100. Does R equal 100 for a train? No, L is certainly not. I don't know anything about trains. This is an example I'm making up. So we can do this we can use this information to do like a little cost-benefit analysis. Now again, I don't know how to do a cost-benefit analysis. I so don't know how to do a cost-benefit analysis that when I gave this talk before, one of my colleagues told me, no, they don't call it that, they call them benefit-cost analyses. So we're gonna do something. Okay, so I'm making the world's most complicated figure here. So this is supposed to be a plot of cost savings due to earthquake early warning. And on the bottom is this ratio R. It's the cost of the damage you're trying to avert to the cost of the action you have to take to avert that damage. So on the left, R is small. That's people for whom the cure is almost as worse as disease, right? It's like your fictional nuclear power plant, because a nuclear disaster is incredibly expensive. It turns out an emergency shutdown of a nuclear reactor, which is called a SCRAM, is incredibly expensive. It's like $1 billion a day or something, and it shortens the life of the nuclear reactor, so you're going to have to build a new nuclear reactor sooner rather than later. Like, it's awful. So the ratio there is probably actually very, very, very small. There's very little gain to be had from shutting down a nuclear reactor. But your train, right, if I get to prevent a very expensive derailment and the cost is just we stop the train, oh, everything's okay, let's keep going. Like, that ratio could be very, very high for a train. So on the left, we have people for whom they really cannot tolerate getting a false alarm. It's just the consequences are too terrible. And on the right are people who are like, yeah, give me a false alarm. I don't care. It's not that bad. I just don't want to risk not getting an alert. And the black dashed line is what would happen if your early warning system was perfect. If you always sent a successful alert for an earthquake, you never missed sending a necessary alert, and you never sent a false alarm by accident. And what you can see is the cost savings only gets high if you're false alarm tolerant, right? Because if it costs you a lot to take protective action, there's just not a lot of cost savings to be had, right? If I'm a fictional printer and it costs me $1,000 if my presses get jammed in an earthquake, but $500 to orderly shut them down and then restart them again after the earthquake, I can only mitigate 50% of my losses because it costs me half as much to take action as it would to have damage from the earthquake. So if you even with perfect early warning system that never made mistakes, your cost savings are only huge if the cost of the thing you're trying to do is very cheap, like stopping a train, like getting an alert here and just drop covering and holding on to protecting yourself from things that might fall down, right? And then if everything's okay, we'll just get back up and it'll be fine and we'll go on with our lives. So the colored line represents different strategies, different ways of taking action. Do I take action only when I know that there's definitely going to be damage, when there's at least a 90% chance that this is going to produce damaging shaking? All the way up to, do I take a really better safe than sorry approach where I take action if there's even just a 5% chance that the earthquake is going to be damaging? So obviously the most obvious way to do it would be to say, okay, give me an alert when there's at least a 50% chance that this earthquake is going to be damaging, right? More likely than not. You'd think that'd be a good idea, but then you end up missing a lot of damaging alerts. You don't take protective action that you could have, and you end up only realizing about 20% cost savings. If you are false alarm tolerant, if you're like the train, and instead you go real extreme, you say, give me an alert when there's even a 5% chance that there's going to be a damaging shaking, even though I know there's a 95% chance that this earthquake is not going to be a threat to me. Well, actually, then you get to realize more than 75% cost savings, even though the vast majority of the alerts you receive are going to turn out to be totally unnecessary false alarms. So who can benefit from earthquake early warning? Well, it turns out the people who can benefit the most are people who are very false alarm tolerant, so they can take a better safe than sorry approach, and who genuinely experience damage from weak shaking, because we can give long warning times for weak shaking. It's the lady with the vase. She is the one who stands to benefit the most from earthquake early warning. The person who can benefit next most is the train. The train doesn't experience damage unless there is very strong shaking, and we can't actually give you a timely warning for strong shaking. But a train can take a better safe than sorry approach. There just isn't much downside to stopping a train unnecessarily. So if the train takes the better safe than sorry approach and says, I'm going to stop for every little baby earthquake just in case it goes up to be a big earthquake, it could still realize high cost savings. But if you're not false alarm tolerant, if you are, say, the nuclear power plant that just can't afford to take action unless it absolutely positively knows that this earthquake is going to produce very strong damaging shaking at my location, then earthquake early warning may just not be for you. Okay, so here are the take-home messages. Number one, earthquakes are not psychic, and neither is earthquake early warning. And warning time doesn't always increase with distance. So the next time you see a figure in the newspaper where you see concentric circles of increasing warning time around an earthquake, you say no, because earthquakes are not psychic, and neither is earthquake early warning. And again, this is not because earthquakes are magic or sorcerers, right? They have very simple laws of physics that we understand and we could tell you all about if only we could absorb the state of stress and the materials on the fault, and instead they are unfortunately buried under miles and miles and miles of rock, so we don't get to see anything that's going on in the fault at all. And take-home message two, earthquake warning is a calculated risk. If you only take action when it is certain that the earthquake will produce damaging shaking at your location, you're going to miss warnings for most dangerous earthquakes. You have to gamble on taking action on small earthquakes, just in case they happen to produce strong shaking. And even though most little baby earthquakes don't go up to be big earthquakes, and hope in the long run the odds pay off to your advantage. So remember that story I told about this being the 30th anniversary of the first earthquake early warning system in the United States, the aftershock warning system after the Loma Prieta earthquake for the people working on the Cypress Expressway. Well, that sent 12 alerts for magnitude 3.7 and larger earthquakes. Those are tiny earthquakes. The magnitude 3.7 earthquake wasn't going to hurt anyone. But there were workers on a very damaged structure that were on a very precarious decision. And for them, the way to go was the better safe than sorry approach. And this was the winning strategy for them, even though basically they ended up getting 12 false alerts because none of those aftershocks were actually damaging to them. But if you were a worker in that situation, you too might want to get an alert just in case. Although I should say, the rumor is, and there are very few people around who can still tell us, but the old timers say that they actually think Caltrans may have unplugged their receiver and didn't get any of the alerts that were sent, but that's another story. So warning is a calculated risk. Earthquake warning is really like a sped up version of a flash flood warning or hurricane warning or tornado warnings, right? If you're in an affected area, you should take action to protect yourself, even though only a small fraction of people in your area will be directly impacted by the flood or the hurricane or the tornado or the earthquake, right? I mean, weather warnings are for a big area, right? They say, flash flood alert in this county or in this area or that weather zone, whatever it is. I mean, how often have you received a flash flood warning? But how often have you personally been drowned in a flash flood? I hope the answer is 0. And really, it's the same thing with earthquake early warning. Like, you take precautions, you alert all the area that could possibly be impacted, even though in reality, little to no of that area actually will be specifically impacted. So for example, here is this picture at the bottom is of an area that was hit by a tornado. And you could say technically, well, really, I only need to warn those 3 houses. They were the only ones that got hit by the tornado, but that's just not how tornado warning works, right? You warn the whole area, and everybody takes protective action, even though for every house except these 3, technically there was a false alarm, and only a few houses suffered direct damage. But that just isn't how weather warning works, and it's not how earthquake warning is going to work either. Okay. So Shake Alert is coming. It is now live in California, and it will be coming to Oregon and Washington soon, probably October, although that's not a definite date yet. It will probably be coming in the form of emergency alerts broadcast to your cell phone in the same way that you receive Amber Alerts. And also, the state of Washington is developing an app that you may be able to download. There are other apps developed for other regions. Again, some of these details are still up in the air. It's a work in progress. But it is coming. And what should you do when you get an alert? Or what should you do when you feel earthquake shaking? You should drop, cover, and hold on to protect yourself. If you get an alert, drop, cover, and hold on. If you don't get an alert, whether or not there's an early warning system, if you feel shaking, you should drop, cover, and hold on to protect yourself. Please do not go outside. Do not go to a doorway. Really, just don't go anywhere. We are mostly concerned about things in the building falling on you, a bookcase falling over or books falling off the bookcase onto you. And so we just want you to get down and protect yourself so that nothing hits you inside. Your building itself is probably safe, and you're also much safer inside than you are outside. There are more things that can hurt you outside than inside. There are falling bricks, there are power lines, there are air conditioners, there are gargoyles. You just don't want to be there. And on top of that, many earthquake injuries come from moving during shaking, right? People start trying to run somewhere and they fall down and they break their nose. They step on broken glass. It's amazing how many injuries come just from not staying put. So please, if you feel shaking, drop, cover, hold on, don't do anything else. And I know that sounds scary. I mean, you've all seen pictures of damaged buildings after earthquakes and you're thinking, I don't want to be in that building if that happens. I want to be out of here. No, you don't. I mean, take a look at what building damage looks like, right? These are 3 shots from the 2014 magnitude 6 earthquake in Napa, California. And yeah, this all looks scary because all the stuff fell down, but all the stuff fell down next to the building it started in, right? Even if you're here in this incredibly damaged building, if you're here, your experience of the earthquake is, oh, look, I suddenly have a new picture window. Whereas if you're here, your experience of this earthquake is, oh my God, bricks are raining down on me. So please don't go outside. In fact, that picture I just showed you, everybody who stayed inside during the San Simeon earthquake was fine. But tragically, the 2 people who died during the San Simeon earthquake are the 2 people who ran outside and got hit by this roof when it collapsed. If you feel shaking, please don't go anywhere. Just drop, cover, and hold on. I know it's super scary. I know you're thinking, I don't want to be in a building, but if you knew you were going to be in a car crash, you would want to buckle your seatbelt and just hang on. It's not the time to crawl out of your car and go car surfing. Similarly, just stay in the building and ride it out. It's your safest place to be. So, when you get an alert, drop, cover, and hold on. And again, if you don't get an alert, if you just feel earthquake shaking anytime, anywhere, drop, cover, and hold on. And remember, most alerts are going to be precautionary, just like the tornado warning for the whole region when only 3 houses get destroyed, and just like the flash flood warning for your county that hopefully doesn't drown you in particular. We're just giving alerts to a large area that might feel shaking, just in case a baby earthquake grows up to be a big earthquake. It doesn't necessarily mean you particularly are going to be impacted by strong, dangerous shaking in your location, but still please drop, cover, and hold on just in case. Shelter when weak shaking is inspected just in case the earthquake goes on to produce strong shaking. It's better safe than sorry. That is the winning strategy for earthquake warning. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to the sponsors tonight, which is for me, besides the lecture series, it's the National Science Foundation, it's IRIS, which is the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology. They host all the seismic data from around the world, and the Seismological Society of America, which was started not coincidentally in 1906. Thank you so much.
So we've got time for a few questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, because with the live stream, you need this.
Okay, in your example of Coos Bay to Seattle, I can see Coos Bay not being the beneficiary of the early warning, but I can see Seattle, as the earthquake kept expanding, the warning would be much more pronounced in the Seattle area. So would they have a much better idea that a large earthquake is coming towards them?
I don't know that that's true. You want to see that movie again? I unfortunately don't have any way to get through this other than slowly. Okay. Let's see. Let's go backwards one. Okay. So, again, it depends what level of shaking you want. You get more warning time for low levels of shaking than for for high levels of shaking. But actually, because Coos Bay is right on top of the rupture, whereas Seattle is a little way off, so it has to get even farther north for you to realize that it's going to also be a threat to places east of the fault. Pick a level of shaking that you care about. Pick 20% G, and look at how much warning time you get for 20% G at each location. So here we go. 3% G, 4, 5. See, there's 0% G protected in Seattle, so Seattle's not getting any warning time yet. So 20% G with 20 seconds to go in Coos Bay. No warning to Portland or Seattle yet. So when do we get to 20% G in Portland? Not yet. Still working on it. Okay, it's getting closer, we're speeding. Okay, negative 40 seconds of warning to Portland and Seattle. Okay, apparently I gave up before Seattle got warning, but it's not going to be very long because it takes so long to see that this is going to be a big earthquake that will produce strong shaking in Seattle.
When I was a kid in school, I remember being taught that if we couldn't find a desk or a chair to get under, to go to a doorway, a strong doorway. But you're saying, no, don't stand in a doorway.
Yes. So, hey, we learn new things every day. There was a time when people thought that it wasn't necessarily a great thought to begin with. The thinking was mostly just that, well, your doorway probably doesn't have a bookcase or a chandelier in it, so if you're standing in your doorway, probably there's nothing to fall on you in your doorway. But then that neglects how do you get to your doorway. And the good news is that buildings in the U.S. are built strong. Like your building, it could be completely unusable after the earthquake. It can be a tear down, but it should not fall down on your head. You should never have to be climbing out of the rubble of your building if you live in the United States, in theory. So you don't have to worry about being in a stronger part of your house versus a less strong part of us. So really all we're talking about is we don't want your television to fall on you. We don't want your bookcase to fall on you. And we also don't want you to fall down and break your nose or fall down or step on broken glass. And I think it was really Northridge, I think, that changed a lot of minds, because when I looked at the injuries after Northridge, it was just, there was a few deaths in that one apartment building that did collapse, but the vast majority of structures were fine. And the hospitals were basically just seeing tons and tons and tons of people who fell down and went boom, and or stepped on broken glass, and or similarly did something really silly, because again, the buildings are supposed to be strong. And so that's why that's why I think it was really Northridge that changed people's minds. Just like, yeah, just don't do anything, it's fine, just stay put, ride it out, be safe so that nothing falls on your head, and you'll be fine.
First of all, I'm a tornado survivor, but beyond that question, we live in a subduction zone. And our biggest concern with an earthquake will be a tsunami.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you're saying to stay put, where the local wisdom is, as soon as you can, is to get your butt up to high ground. How do you respond to that?
They're both true. I'm talking about staying put during the shaking. You are not running anywhere while shaking from a magnitude 9 earthquake is happening. In fact, the definition, unfortunately, I can't break into my slides to show my hidden slides because they're being magically controlled from the booth. If I didn't have my hidden slides, if I had access to my hidden slides, I have the official description of what all these levels are. Oh, wow. Okay, all the way at the end. All the way at the end. Keep going. Okay, up a bit, up a bit, up a bit, up a bit. Keep going up, up, up. Up. It's the one with all the text on it. Up, up. That one. Down one. Down one. There you go. Okay. This is the official description of shaking intensity, right? So strong, shaping, blah blah blah. Damage, slight, let's see. Shoot, it really just doesn't have the damage. So basically, there's another version of this that I stupidly apparently didn't even include, which is that by the time you get up to like colors that are orange, you may not be able to stand at all, let alone run for higher ground. So you're going to have to sit out the earthquake. Once the earthquake's over, then get moving up as far as you can. But yeah, you're not going anywhere while the earthquake's happening. You can try, but it's not happening.
So can I just chime in? So I'm a paleontologist, conodont biostratigrapher by training, but because I teach here geology, that would be me, I got to participate in the Tsunami Ready community discussions a number of years ago. And one of my sole roles during that process was to kind of address what you two are discussing in the moment. And it's not a tsunami-ready community, it's a Cascadia-ready community, because it's the 1-2 punch. You have to deal with the earthquake first, and then you respond to the tsunami. Because you got to deal with event number 1, and then event number 2.
I see you always are doing these predicting, like the earthquake is going to move from south to north. Could it just as likely move from north to south? Because I live down near the Salton Sea in part of the year, and they always say it's going to start there. Why wouldn't it start up at Hollister or some other place?
Great question. It absolutely would have. That's why I kept saying it conveniently starts, because in the bad old days, and I mean up until last year when I started complaining about this, people said that the amount of warning time increases with distance. So when they wanted to show off how awesome earthquake early warning was going to be, they would talk about how, well, if the next Cascadia earthquake started in Northern California, it would take 5 minutes to get to Seattle and you would get 5 minutes of warning. That, of course, neglects the fact that it's just as likely that the earthquake would start in Seattle, where you would get no warning and move down. They also would say, well, what if you had a 1906 repeat that conveniently started all the way north of Cape Mendocino and took a minute and a half to get to San Francisco? This neglects the fact that the actual 1906 earthquake started in San Francisco.
Hello. I was wondering about the aftershocks and how long we should stay inside after the first wave.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, aftershocks last days, weeks. There are no more. There are other dominoes falling, and again, we can't say anything about them until they do. So you're totally fine to go about your life until you either get an alert or feel shaking from something else, at which point you should then drop cover and hold on again. In fact, I think that touches on a really big issue, which is I say if you feel shaking or you get an alert, you should drop cover and hold on for a reasonable amount of time and then go on with your life. That I do worry that, if you get an alert and you're taking this better safe than sorry approach, and then you don't feel any shaking, you might not know, when you should stop drop covering and holding on. There was a story, there was a group that had been studying the history of earthquakes in Sumatra in Indonesia by doing sort of the same thing that they do with trees in Cascadia, where they do these dendrochronologies, except they were looking at the chronologies of the growth rings on corals to find out when they had been killed by being uplifted or being dropped down by earthquakes. And while they were out here doing field work, they would always do tsunami education. They would tell people, if you feel shaking that lasts beyond a certain amount of time, that's an earthquake that produces a tsunami. So you should immediately go to high ground and you should not come back until the tsunami has receded. And then there was a fairly major earthquake in Sumatra, and they went back to do follow-up studies, although, they went back as soon as they could, but that's still like days or a week later. And they went to the same area where they had done tsunami education, and they found that the village was deserted. And the people were all at the top of the mountain, because this was not actually a tsunamigenic earthquake, but hey, they had told them, if you feel the shaking, go up to the top of the hill and don't come back down until the tsunami comes. And so they had heard that, and they were waiting for that tsunami. So yes, don't spend a week under your desk. Like this, we're talking seconds here. So go under your desk, and if nothing happens in a few seconds, it was a false alarm.
Okay. I've lived over here since '73, and I fished commercially out of Charleston, and every now and then we would hear a tsunami alert. And everybody got down their boat and got out to deep water. The last one I recall, we had about 6 inches, which it came through, which we were very thankful for. And anyhow, there is evidence subtidally out there. One of them is a bunch of dead cockles in 2.5 feet of mud, all black, all very dead, and they've been that dead for hundreds or even thousands of years. And up the South Slough is 2 boats that are laying in about 20 feet of water. So we've had big tsunamis here. And I hope we don't have your 9, because if it is, it's going to be big. I would like to see it where I get it where it starts to do it, rather than once it really starts heavily shaking. Because even in your nuclear power plant, if you're the only one that's starting to shake, it'd be nice to be ready to do it rather than actually do it. You know, somebody's going to say, turn off the button, you know.
Right, but my impression from what you're telling me is that you are like the fictional train or the fictional lady with the vase, someone for whom you would much rather not miss an alert than receive, it's more important for you to miss an alert than to receive false alerts, because if you get a false alert and you go out, just in case, it's an inconvenience, but you come back and not much harm was done. So that's great, and that makes you an excellent candidate user for earthquake early warning. But that may not be true for other applications because, you know, for example, cutting power lines or cutting utilities, because as we've learned from the power shutoffs in Northern California, right, that can cost money, research, lives, even just turning off the electricity. So probably the best, what earthquake early warning should be and the best approach and who it's most useful for is entirely about the person using it.
So what would your advice be if an earthquake starts while we're in a movie theater or in a room like this?
It's basically always drop cover and hold on.
Yeah, I'm a retired longshoreman. I've been in earthquakes in Hawaii. And, you know, $6-9 billion damage. What I'm getting at is right here, went to a city council meeting because I'm against putting LNG over here. And they voted for it. With the last vote, the guy was really smiling. He was the city council big daddy, you know? And I was appalled to the fact that they voted for it, you know? And I'm asking you if that's a good idea.
Well,
in this location.
I am really not an engineer. I mean, so what the seismology site can do is provide an understanding of the hazards and be able to say that, okay, this is a subduction zone, it has earthquakes this large. You might reasonably see this level of shaking and then over the lifetime of your plant, or you might have this chance of seeing a tsunami of this size over the lifetime of your plant, and give those criteria, and then it's up to an engineer to figure out, is there a way that I can build whatever it is that you want to build in a way that can withstand that level of shaking and that sort of tsunami. And so really, the question is just making sure that you understand the hazards in advance and that you are requiring that anything that is built is engineered to be appropriate for the hazards that exist. And that is a community standpoint. So the USGS always sees itself as providing science in the nation's interest. We will never tell you where you should or shouldn't build or what you should or shouldn't build, but we will tell you the hazards so that you can make the decision about what you feel is appropriate.
I wanted to make a comment that you said wait till the tsunami recedes. That's not necessarily true because they say don't go down, because a lot of the time there is a second or a third one coming.
Right, of course. So, I'm sorry, I meant.
Well,
everything,
just
yeah.
letting you know.
Until the tsunami was over, until all the tsunami waves had happened and they're gone, and
the other thing I'm catching is, okay, we
don't follow the ocean out when it goes down.
No.
If the ocean's going away, don't follow it. That's the wrong direction. Go the other way.
My policy is if I see it going out, I'm going up. The other thing was, I'm kind of pretty much getting, because I don't keep up with technology and all that either, but it makes sense to just, if you even felt a small earthquake, to drop, go under, and hold, because as you're saying, it's almost like spinning the wheel of fortune.
Yeah.
And you don't know until it's all said and done.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. I think it's true for a number of different reasons, right? As you said, because it's just a matter of chance. Because in terms of the things that might hurt you, you might actually even care about a little bit of shaking because, like, I have stupidly pointy things on high shelves that could fall over on me, so, it's probably just safer to, just in case, not let that happen. And the other thing is that, little earthquakes, shaking and earthquakes are not necessarily, how should I phrase this? You can experience strong shaking from small earthquakes because magnitude is literally the physical size of an earthquake, right? So let's go way back again. So we recently just had the anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake in California. A lot of people are asking, well, we made it through the Loma Prieta, but that wasn't the big one. How that was already pretty scary. How do I, get ready for the big one? Let's do this. Right, but if I was that place that was red in the Santa Cruz Mountains, it's not redder in 1906. What makes 1906 a bigger magnitude earthquake is that it is physically a longer earthquake, and it produced strong shaking over a larger region. It's not that the strongest shaking in 1906 is stronger than the stronger shaking in Loma Prieta. It's that strong shaking was over a larger region. So if you're close to a smaller magnitude earthquake, you can feel the strong shaking you feel from a small magnitude earthquake can absolutely be the big one in terms of shaking. And so it doesn't have to be a big earthquake to produce a lot of shaking or to produce shaking that you care about or to be a hazard to something that you love. You don't want grandma's china to be destroyed by a magnitude 6 or a magnitude 8.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I see the hand, but I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight and making your time. I'd like to thank the Mill. I'd like to thank DB Western, definitely IRIS and SSA. Again, we've had 3 earthquake talks in a row. It won't be 4. The next one is climate change on March 13th. Should be some stellar images of ice that still exists. I'd like to also thank the college for providing the space, also the tech staff. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Kavika. Thank you, Dallas. And also for live streaming. So if you ever miss any of these, you can always catch it on live stream, www.socc.edu. Thank you all. Thank you for your contributions. If you didn't sign in, if you would be so kind to do so on your way out, and there are some goodies out there. If you got places to post the March poster, I'd appreciate you taking it. And I know there's at least one person still with a question, so I'm going to bring Dr. Minson out into the lobby, and you can continue questions out there. Thank you to Sarah for making time in her schedule as well.
Thank you to all of you for coming. Thanks.
Hope to see you all Friday, March 13th.